Hello, I'm Owen Matthews and I'm the author of Black Sun.
Brought to you by the Wilbur and Niso Smith Foundation, the Adventure Society is a book club for adventurous people. In each episode, we try to bridge the gap between an author and their readers. In this episode, we talk to Owen Matthews, the author of Black Sun. Can you tell us a little bit about Black Sun?
It's a Cold War thriller. It's set in a secret city, which actually existed, called Azuma 16. And the story revolves around a murder by radiation poisoning of a brilliant young physicist. And the victim and all of the other scientists that live in this secret city are engaged on a top secret project, which is to build the most powerful thermonuclear bomb that the Soviet Union has ever created. And the whole world in which Black Sun is set is based on a true story, on true historical events.
Could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a writer?
Well, I've been a writer all my life in the sense that I was a journalist straight out of university. I moved to Budapest, largely because I didn't fancy working for a living in London. So I decided that Budapest was a good place to be, age 21. And it was just a few years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I began, like many highly educated and not terribly hardworking young people of that generation to do freelance journalism. And eventually I ended up liking it, and I ended up in 1994 I went to Sarajevo. That was my first bout of war reporting during the Yugoslavian War. Then I became a reporter for the Moscow Times, which was an English language newspaper. It was my first proper full-time newspaper job in the wilds of Moscow in 1995. And in some ways, actually, on reflection, I have to say that was maybe the peak of my journalistic career. So 1995 to 1997. I don't think I've ever been quite so engaged or motivated or had such fun doing the job. But in 1997, I joined Newsweek magazine and I became a foreign correspondent. And I've been and I was based in Moscow and Istanbul, and but I was doing most of my work in Afghanistan and Iraq. I wrote my first book in 2008, which was a family memoir about my family background. And that is that my mother is Russian. She was born in Kharkiv in 1934. And she, after a series of various personal adventures and dramas, married a young English academic and was able to get out of the Soviet Union in 1969. So the story of her life and my life in Russia was the basis of my first book, which was a family biography called Stalin's Children back in 2008.
So you've written journalism, nonfiction, memoir, fiction. Do you think the writing for each differs?
There are ways in which writing nonfiction are easier than writing fiction, because actually the step from journalism to nonfiction is just really one of scale and of concept. In fact, I mean, so to put it very simply, if you're a professional journalist and you're writing stories every day, you're used to sort of framing sort of beginning, middle, end sort of quotes. I mean, the basic sort of technique of very short form which is journalism, is just pretty easily applicable to nonfiction. The only thing is you have to just put an overarching structure on it, and put very simply, to write a sort of big work of nonfiction, it's like writing 100 articles, but which are all sort of related and sort of threaded together. And each chapter, let's say a chapter is 5,000 words. Just say it's like writing 5 long pieces, and so in that sense, to put it very brutally, basically the nonfiction is just journalism writ large, and in that sense, it's easier because you just sort of keep plodding on, and as long as you just sort of keep pushing on. Like today, I will do this chunk and that of this story, of this chapter, and so on. And you just sort of plow through it. It's easier because it's easier to systematize. It's harder because you're just dealing with a gigantic volume of material and you can't make any of it up. So there's a problem of sort of just pure scale, and that's the hard part. With fiction, it's a different thing because you're making it up, but at the same time, you also have a kind of problem of scale because it's much more difficult to systematize because you're making it up. I mean, and we can discuss later. I mean, in terms of technique, some thriller writers are incredibly keen on preparation and sort of little story cards which they cover their dining room tables with, and the sort of little charts and the flow charts and so on, and they have everything sort of mapped out. And some just sort of go with the flow. I'm one of the people that did the planning, frankly.
Where and when did the idea for Black Sun first appear?
That's a really good question. Strange enough, Wikipedia.
That is not the answer I was expecting. Tell me more.
Well, I don't know about you, but I very often when I'm just sitting in front of my laptop, having, like, as usual, sort of failed to do any work, and I just sort of go down Wikipedia rabbit holes, just clicking through Wikipedia, which I suppose is preferable to clicking through TikTok, but it's about as much of it. But sometimes it is productive. So I just I don't even remember exactly why or how I started reading about this, but I first came across the story just simply through just clicking through the history of the Soviet atomic program. And it turns out that one of the most interesting episodes of this, in fact, I had been initially interested in the atomic spies. That was actually how I got to it. Because, as you know, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in 1948, and it got the blueprints through a network of spies at Los Alamos. And they basically stole the design from the Americans, in short. And just sort of reading around that, I came across this extraordinary story. And of RDS 220, what American journalists subsequently called the Tsar bomb. So I just sort of stumbled across a sort of remarkable real life story, and it really sort of sparked my imagination.
Could you tell us more about Azuma 16?
Well, unfortunately, I'd love to be able to tell you more, but I was unable to visit it because in fact, maybe someday my application will come through. I lodged an application with the FSB, the Federal Security Service in Russia, whenever it was, 4 years ago when I started writing the book, and you can visit it. The story of Azuma 16 is that it was a very famous monastery town on the steppes of the Volga, near Nizhny Novgorod in central Russia, and it was chosen by the Igor Kurchatov, the head of the Soviet atom bomb, as one of several dozen secret locations where they would develop the atom bomb. And literally, rather just like the Berlin Wall, one day, like, trucks appeared on the steppe, surrounded the city, like sort of nailed in, using convict labor. They cleared a circle of trees, used the trees to create sort of a fence, electrified the fence, barbed wire, and everybody who was extraneous, who was kicked out. Everyone who lived in the town sort of became, janitors and electricians and, sort of tram drivers and stuff. And they built on this space a city that was secret. But one of the most interesting things in the autobiographies I should say, that I read, the memoirs of the people who worked there, was that although the scientists who were sent by the Soviet nuclear program to these secret cities to develop their the different parts of the Soviet weapons program. And not just the nuclear weapons program, by the way. There were secret cities that worked on biological weapons, on chemical weapons, and so on. And the scientists in the nuclear program were cut off from the rest of the Soviet Union and lived lives of totally sort of secured secrecy. But yet inside the city, at the insistence of Kurchatov, who set up the whole program, he insisted and had a huge ideological fight with Lavrenty Beria, who was in the 40s the head of the Soviet secret police, over the internal freedom. And he said, if we are international working scientists, we need to be aware of and be fully conversant with the world of science everywhere with which we're working. And that includes obtaining, having all the latest scholarly journals, and having not just the scholarly journals, but also the New York Times and Newsweek magazine and films and records. So you have this weird paradox by the time you get to the real life world in 1961, is you have a secret city full of scientists who are working on the most secret weapons program in the Soviet Union. But at the same time, in many ways, they are the most free people because they have the access to information. And that part is historically true. But unfortunately, I was unable to visit Azuma 16, which still exists. It's still because it's still a secret city, and it's still where Russia produces its nuclear warheads today.
So you've blended historical fact and fiction absolutely beautifully. Mm-hmm. And I know large elements of the novel are based on truth. Am I right to say that Adamov and Korin, two of the leads on the project in the city, are based on real people?
Yes, absolutely. There is Yuri Adamov is the head of the institute. He is the chief of this whole gigantic scientific effort to create this bomb. He's responsible to the Politburo, to the Soviet leadership for creating it, and he is the person who is the theoretical mind behind it, and he's also the managing director. And he's based very closely. His character, or rather, the role that he occupies is based exactly on that of Andrei Sakharov, who was the real-life nuclear physicist who headed the program and who made the decision to radically change the bomb's structure 10 days before in real life because he was afraid that he was going to blow up the planet. Now, the reason why he has been fictionalized is that Sakharov is such a distinctive character that I didn't really feel there are certain people in my fiction, in fact, particularly in the book the sequel, which I've just finished writing, by the way, that are real people. But when someone who is so important and in your fiction sort of quite controversial, you can't make that a real person. You have to fictionalize him. But the model is Andrei Sakharov. And the Pavel Korin, there's no model for his for the role of his character in, as far as I know, in history, or there's no specific model. But his biography, which is of a Soviet engineer who is arrested, sent to the Gulag, and spends years in the 40s in the Gulag, working in a sort of Gulag laboratory for the state, is very closely based on that of Sergei Korolev. And Sergei Korolev was the father of the Soviet space program, and he sent Yuri Gagarin into space. And he was an aircraft designer during the World War II, literally in a Gulag. He and Andrei Tupolev, who gave his name to a generation of Soviet planes. The old planes, which is Tu-134, is Tupolev. And so these two absolutely brilliant sort of geniuses of Soviet science were together in a Gulag, were in a department of the Gulag, in prisoner outfits, but actually in a Gulag laboratory in the war, they were designing rocket planes, in fact. So that story is entirely true.
Which aspects of the story were the most heavily researched?
Well, specifically the technical ones, and exactly what it was that made the bomb dangerous. And actually, I can tell you, what made the bomb dangerous was largely because, I mean, without going into the technical aspects of it, but basically what you realize very quickly when you start reading around this subject of nuclear bomb testing and the Cold War arms race is that there's a reason why they call a nuclear bomb test a test, because as well as being like a terrifyingly, a powerful military exercise, it's also a science experiment. It's just a very, very big science experiment. And as I mentioned in the book, the point is that they don't, the clue is in the title, is in the word experiment. They don't always have any idea of an idea of how this is going to turn out. And as one of the characters recalls, and this is again a true story, that actually there was an American nuclear test in 1954 that went 3 times over its expected yield because of actually, in fact, because of the different reaction of lithium deuteride, as it happens. But the Castle Bravo test. So that part was actually really interesting. It was the only part that I researched in any sort of great detail. Was the idea that these reactions and these different adjustments could make enormous differences in the power of the bomb. And that's what makes them so dangerous. I mean, they're already quite dangerous because they're a nuclear bomb. But they are especially dangerous if you start sort of messing with the formula, because you just don't know what you're going to get. And also, what really just blew my mind was the fact that when you split an atom, or when you fuse 2 atoms, those reactions release such vast quantities of energy that, in fact, the Hiroshima bomb, they used 6 kilos of plutonium, in fact, to as the explosive core of the bomb. But of those 6 kilos, 6,000 grams of plutonium, only about 2 or 3 grams reacts. The rest is just blown to smithereens. So you have 5,997 grams of plutonium that just gets blown up and just sort of spread around, and that's causes actually a lot of fallout. It's just the bomb core. But and 3 grams react. That's 20 kilotons of power is from 3 grams of plutonium, and you put in 6 kilos of plutonium. So what happens if you make a bomb which explodes not 3 grams but 30 grams or 300 grams? But if you read Black Sun, you'll know all about all about this. But just as a point of scientific fact, I just found that's so fascinating. And just, of course, in dramatic terms, as a novelist, because I'm not a scientist but a novelist, it was important because it just adds to the jeopardy so extraordinarily.
How did you, as a writer, learn some of the spies' tricks of the trade?
Well, actually, in the same way that all spy writers read about it, and that's by reading other spy writers. Strangely enough, I think some actually spy writers have direct knowledge of it. I mean, John le Carré actually really was a spy, a trained spy. I'm not sure that many actually are. So you never quite know whether all of this sort of law of the tradecraft and so on is actually just sort of this construct, or whether it's it's like submarine novels. Most people who write submarine novels have not been in a submarine. Like, they haven't served in submarine. They just know because they watched The Hunt for Red October. So I think it's kind of the same with like spy tradecraft. I definitely don't have any special knowledge of it, but it's and I just sort of picked it up from like every spy film and spy novel. So and also, I mean, I've read quite a lot of nonfiction about about spies as well. So I mean, I think that there are certain things like sort of dead letter drops and brush pasts and telephone codes and so on. The one thing that's definitely not true and invented by me was the secret telephone network. That's just a figment of my imagination. But I think it would be quite cool if it did exist. I mean, just to explain to the few remaining people on Earth who have yet to read Black Sun, the idea is that the Colonel Vasin, well, he's still Major at that point, Major Vasin communicates with his boss by using a internal telephone system of the Soviet railway lines, which it connects. So it's like hiding in plain sight. You use like a railway network, but it is true that the railway does have its own telephone network. Though that is a fact. And I thought how cool it would be if if the KGB was to use that as a sort of secret communications device.
Are there any particular books or authors which have made a lasting impact on you or your writing?
Yes, well, of course, Fatherland, as we just mentioned by Robert Harris. Strangely enough, in terms of describing procedure, is The Day of the Jackal and Dogs of War by Frederick Forsyth, because it's really interesting. There are some writers that actually write brilliantly accomplished novels without actually, and you don't realize that they've actually left out a gigantic sort of slab of technique. For instance, Frederick Forsyth, he doesn't do there's no dialogue, and the hero has no character. I mean, the Jackal, when you read The Day of the Jackal, he has no backstory. He says almost nothing. He just does. He's like a machine. Like he just does this and that. And of course, I mean, of course, as we know, the basis of screenwriting is that action reveals character. Of course, action reveals character. But nonetheless, there's like only a tiny clue of the man that he is, and the whole book hangs together on pure procedure. It's The Day of the Jackal is like the purest procedural you'll ever read, because it's just he gets a gun, he gets a passport, he scopes the president, the president's movements. There's a whole sort of the background of the assassination attempt, and so on and so forth. It's just pure action or pure procedure, and in both. And in that sense, Frederick Forsyth is absolutely brilliant, because he can't do character and he can't do dialogue, but yet he's an absolutely brilliant novelist. And conversely, John le Carré is sort of the opposite, because in Tinker Tailor, there's it's a spy novel with no action, and no one, almost nobody gets shot. It's just the pure game, and it's just sort of this conjuring the world. So in terms of the atmosphere and the creating the world in which these people operate, and which sort of forms is formative of their actions and character. Le Carré, the Tinker Tailor trilogy, the Smiley trilogy is brilliant. I should add that The Hunt for Red October is also an excellent thriller. I should mention that. Oh, and also, sorry. Of course, my main model, I forgot, of course, Gorky Park by Martin Cruz Smith. That stylistically and in terms of tone and in terms of structure and pace, the Gorky Park is the novel that Black Sun most closely resembles, by Martin Cruz Smith.
Can you tell us about any adventurous experiences in your life? Have any influenced you as a writer?
Well, adventurous. Yeah, well, I mean, I spent most of my life covering wars, which is a sort of adventure. I mean, it's a peculiar sort of adventure, because as a journalist, you're somewhat protected. You have some training, you have some equipment, you have backup, you have money, and so on. So it's but Probably the most adventurous thing I did. So I started in Bosnia in '94. Then I covered there was a war in South Lebanon in '96. Then I went to Afghanistan for the first time in '97, and that was quite adventurous. I rode with spent 10 days riding with an active cavalry unit, actual like real life horse cavalry. Who were in action against the Taliban, and they were pretty hardcore actually, about 1,500 strong, and they would fire RPGs, rocket propelled grenades from horseback, and they were extremely effective against Taliban armor. It was like north of Herat in western Afghanistan. That was super fun. I like the I loved Afghanistan.
If you could give any practical tips or exercises for aspiring writers to try at home, what would they be?
It's really super simple. I do actually have an excellent formula, and that is write 700 words of anything. It can be literally anything, and it doesn't even have to be in a chunk. But just like carry a notebook around. You overhear people at a bus stop saying, instead of, jungle be massive or something, like just some like sort of, again, like totally absurd. It does not have to be anything, just like something that like catches your ear, like, oh my God, that's such a sort of weird, funny little sort of rap that he did, or, just a mood, and just like write all the time that you can. And that's so much more valuable than sitting down in front of a computer and saying like, and now I will write a piece of prose, and it will be 700 words long, and like I will then edit it, and it will be this and it will be that. Like, no, I mean, save that for later. The point is that you just need to always just be writing stuff. In fact, last night I had a debate with some friends about who said this, but I thought it was Chekhov, but in fact it was Tolstoy. Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, the Russian writer, said, if you can not write, don't write. In other words, if you're capable of not writing, don't write. Seriously, if you have to force yourself to write, then, take up dancing, post to TikTok or something. Like, if it's not a compulsion, if it's hard for you to write, I mean, let me rephrase that. Writing actually is hard. I mean, good writing is hard. But the point is that it has to be a compulsion. It has to be something that that comes out of you uncontrollably, and sort of it has to be your interface with the world. It has to be your personal form of expressing yourself, or articulating or understanding the world around you. Because of course, writers don't just write for their audience; they write for themselves.